Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guest today is Jason Rapolsky. He's the Vice President and Director of the Digital Modernization Accelerator at Leidos. Jason, good to have you with us.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate being here.
And you know, the enterprise idea of enterprise IT and enterprise management is really evolving. And in the last 10 years, and really at an accelerated pace in the last couple of years, agencies have had not one, but maybe several commercial clouds, several vendors.
Right.
And so how does that, in your mind, change the whole notion of enterprise management when a lot of the enterprise is not really technically yours?
I think it changes in profound ways. I think organizations have spent a lot of time putting governance in place to be able to make sure their environments are being run well, and they'll be able to trust that they're going to be running well. And they're set up to be able to adhere to security guidances that have been in place from their organizations. And when they move to cloud or they move to different aspects of cloud or grow to different edges parts of the cloud, this really changes a lot of things that you've got to think about and how that governance is going to be set, how you're going to manage that environment, how are you going to put up those resources, who's going to take care of those resources, how you're going to do configuration management across all those areas. I think with the fact that you probably spent a lot of time putting that governance in place, and it may have been static at some point, you don't do a lot of changes to it, but with the speed at which those environments are changing now, you have to be flexible in your governance and have it set up in a way to be able to adapt to that environment. I think the other thing that you've got to look at is security. We talked about having those policies in place as part of the governance, but as those environments expand, as you're adding new components that might be on the edge, you've added a lot of new attack vectors that added a lot of risk to your environment, a lot of risk to your data. And looking at how you're going to manage that, how you're going to keep that environment secure, what techniques you're going to use to be able to do that, those also have to keep pace with the change that's going on in your environment.
So you really have two kind of general areas to worry about with this hybrid environment, this hybrid enterprise. One is the governance,
yep,
and the other is the technical end, like configuration management and making sure that attributes get inherited or transferred across, right? I mean,
yeah.
Is that a good way to look at it?
Absolutely, and I think as you're doing that, you have to factor into where you're going to put your workloads when you move things to the clouds and realize how that's going to impact how you're going to utilize those things as well as how you're going to manage it. And I think one of the things that becomes very important to think about that's different from sort of an on-premise environment is the costs that are going to be involved. The dynamic nature of the cloud, which is one of the reasons that I think a lot of people go to the cloud to be able to scale quickly, also creates that risk that in that scaling quickly, you've increased cost quickly. So that you need to be able to plan for how you're going to manage that cost and realize who can incur that cost and how you want to control it in case it gets out of control.
And that really gets into the governance question because, you know, early in the cloud era, agencies were encouraging people to set up an account, go ahead and, you know, try this out, but all of a sudden, none of it is really free.
Exactly, and so, you know, having partners to be able to work to help you understand that and manage it is one of the things that we encourage at Leidos. It's one of those things that as we get engaged with our customers, we're helping them try to build and manage these extensible digital ecosystems that they're creating with all these different devices and all these different capabilities they want. But we're always looking to help them enable their mission and achieve their missions in ways that they want to whenever they need to. And so that's what we look to do with our management processes.
Right, and you mentioned that word extensible because you also mentioned something that's significant here, and that's edge.
Yes.
Because edge is neither data center nor cloud, but
right.
It's your asset, but yet it has to interact and live within the cloud enterprise, but it's neither fish nor fowl with respect to how we classically think about that.
Right, and when you think about the different environments those edge devices may be working in, they may be things in you know, different warehouses, they may be something on a battlefield, different kind of sensor platforms. Now you got also to think about the resiliency of having those connections in place and how well those systems are going to communicate together and how you're looking at managing all this to be able to facilitate resiliency. It's not just a design and technical aspect, there's also these techniques that you have to put in place to be able to make sure that's going to sustain.
Right, and so that resiliency then could extend to the ability to, say, move a workload not to another cloud, not to your data center, but to an edge facility if that's what was required by circumstances.
Right, exactly. So many different possibilities now when you have this ecosystem that's evolving quickly.
And that relates back to that idea of the configuration management and so forth, so that when a workload hits that edge, the workload thinks it's in a cloud or in your data center,
right?
so to speak.
It shouldn't matter, right? It shouldn't matter where it's located. You should have the policies and processes in place so that it's going to operate the way you want it to, wherever it's going to be located. The nice thing about the cloud is you shouldn't have to worry about that. It doesn't matter.
And the security aspect that you mentioned, that really spans both the technical domain and the governance domain too, doesn't it?
Correct. Whenever you build something out, especially from a digital modernization standpoint, security's got to be at the heart of what you're doing. You always have to factor that in. So yes, the policies are part of it, and then the techniques and the tools that you want to be able to use, and realizing how the different environments may be utilizing those tools and different tools, and then be able to collect that data that's involved with that security activities is also very important as part of that management process.
And there are cybersecurity levels and different techniques, and then there are also classification levels.
Yes.
That are kind of an allied security question, if you will. And so does it become important to make sure that you can easily move a workload that might have a higher level of classification to make sure that it's suitable for all of the places that workload could go in that enterprise you're trying to manage?
Yes. When you start talking about the different classifications, it gets more complicated, even more so than just having the environment growing. I think there's limitations in places that you can have that classification of systems or data, and so you have to, when you architect, you have to have that plan ahead and realize where you're going to put that stuff and what levels it can process at, and realize that you've built an environment that can support that and maintain that. Especially as you're looking to move things around, yeah, absolutely understanding how that's going to keep in line with your security policies, the authorizations that you have to operate those systems and maintain that data has got to be maintained as well. And that could that's in itself as a process to make sure that that's going to be safe.
But there are techniques you can have to say if the security controls and the classifications can be inherited, or if not inherited, transferred from load to load, then you can speed up that ATO if that goes along with it.
Absolutely. I think having design plans and concepts and how you set up your cloud environments really helps that, because you bake those necessary requirements into those platforms and into those environments you create. Concepts of secure landing zones to be able to build those things out with those policies already in place, so that as you move them along, you've already got the approval to utilize those environments because they've already met the security guidance in place. And that as you're moving things around, as long as you're keeping those kind of environments that have already been improved, it's easy to move them back into those environments.
Yeah, it sounds like you almost need some kind of a layer to manage all of this in between your data and your applications and your clouds.
Yes, absolutely. I think having the component and a layer in there to be able to do that, in some cases a management platform to help you understand what your environment is doing and how it's set up is going to be very important to be able to do this successfully.
All right, so we've been talking at the enterprise level, the cloud, data center level, edge level. Let's move down a notch and talk about data management, interoperability, and that part of it, the more technical below the enterprise level.
Right.
What are some of the management and interoperability considerations, and how do you attack those?
Right. So I think organizations are realizing that the data is really king to what they're doing. It's very important to what they've got, and they realize that there's a lot of power behind it. And so what we're trying to work to when you start designing these things is to continue to realize the power of your data, and don't do anything that's going to prevent you from being able to continue to realize that, and don't get in your way with it. But you also have to realize that there's a lot of difficulties as you move to the cloud, especially with tracking your data. You have to be very sensitive to where that data is going to be, how it's going to move around your system. I think when you're contained in your data centers, it's very easy to know where things are. As you expand to multiple clouds, now you've got data going in many different places. Your WAN environment has now changed significantly. You've got to worry about inter-cloud communications now in addition, once you get into a multi-cloud environment. So understanding how your data is moving around. I think a lot of organizations don't necessarily end up into a multi-cloud situation from a planned activity. I think through mergers or business units going off and acquiring their own cloud services to be able to do things, organizations find themselves in a multi-cloud situation. And through this, they may find out that by looking at it, certain centers of gravity have established with their data that they hadn't planned for. And so they're going to want to look at that and understand where those gravities exist and understand how the data is moving around. And then realize that when we start talking about edge devices, now your data is becoming very distributed. And it's no longer just going to be in one place. It's not just one data fabric that you laid in. That's all you have to worry about. You have to start thinking about different ways to be able to plan for this. Realizing that the movement of data can actually be one of your big cost factors, because if it's going
yep.
between two different clouds, now you've got egress charges that might be impacting you. And so realizing how that data is moving through is going to be very important to be able to manage things like cost. Along with it, with the different clouds that you've got involved, there's different backup and recovery solutions that would be in place in those different clouds. And you've got processes that are already set out with your governance that says how you want to do this. And so you need to make sure that you're still going to keep in line with those and keep some consistency in how you're doing that backup and recovery. And when you think about interoperability, I think a lot of the things that systems are, or that organizations are trying to do is be able to encourage interoperability so that they can get more interactions with related organizations, related systems. And I think multi-cloud gives you an opportunity to enhance your interoperability, because you can plan where that data needs to go, and you maybe use those to be able to move the data easier or faster, or make things closer to where they need to go. And it maybe enhance your ability to do interoperability as you work on that and as you look at the options for different clouds. I think these are certain challenges that, when we start talking about the defense community with the different services and how they're setting up their JADC2 implementations, there's something that they're probably dealing with. But it's not unique to them either. A lot of healthcare organizations are also looking at interoperability and trying to find ways to be able to make their data accessible and easy to move around so they can share, ultimately to get better improvement for health of people.
And looking at the cost factors and the idea of that single data fabric, which you might not have, it strikes me that you have to be careful there, because you could create a logical data fabric, even though it's not really a physical data fabric anymore. And therefore you could not realize the extraction costs that are actually going on, because you're looking at it at that abstraction logical layer and not the actual physical movement of the data, so that trying to abstract the fabric could drive your costs before you even realize it.
Yes, absolutely. I think there's a lot of planning that you have to do in this, as things are getting more complex. And I think as you're looking at a multi-cloud environment, you may want to think about stretching that fabric into a data mesh that can exist across, and realize from a plan standpoint how that data is going to move through there and how you can make best use of it.
Yeah, this is really in the weeds question, but it strikes me that perhaps you could have a system designed such that you have your source of data not in the cloud. It's processed in the cloud, but you may not want to re-extract it. Just get, so to speak, the answer back. The data is not extracted that you uploaded, and then just erase it in the cloud.
Yeah, so definitely taking advantage of where those cloud data sources are, and allowing systems to get access to it without actually having to move the data would be a very good thing for you from an architecture standpoint, to manage your costs, but also to manage the security of that data as well.
And you mentioned inter-cloud communications, and that's a big issue, and I guess the industry is catching up to the fact that customers want to do that.
Yes.
And that they can't treat themselves as siloed enclaves anymore.
Right.
So what does that mean in terms of how you architect your applications when you need that interoperability of the clouds, above the communication layer or the data layer?
Right. So at first I'd say you're still architecting your systems in the same way that you would think about when going to one cloud. And the one way you want to make sure your architectures are flexible. So you want to be able to look at putting microservices in place in your architecture of your system and your applications. And with this, you want to be able to stage them into containers. This gives you that flexibility in the different environments. And what you want then is probably put a container management solution in place that's consistent across the different cloud environments that you'll be looking at. And I think all the major cloud providers have a Kubernetes service, for example, and allowing you to be able to set that up and implement your service and security policies into that container management solution, and making that consistent across the different clouds gives you an ease, in a way, from portability, because you know that those environments are going to be consistent when you're moving those workloads from one cloud to the next cloud. I think the big recommendation would be that if you're designing for portability, then you need to avoid utilizing cloud native services that are unique to that cloud. An AWS Maria database, for example, will be something that you're not going to find if you move to Azure or Google. There will be maybe something like it, but you won't have that exact service there. So you have to avoid utilizing those kind of cloud-specific services in your architecture design, and take more of an open architecture approach to make it more portable as you work on that.
And let me just interrupt for a second.
Yes.
So with having that microservices staged in the containers, this Kubernetes instance, then the application itself, the logic, could almost be separate from that part of the environment. That is, certain services that all applications use, you could leave in place at all the clouds. So when the application moves, it's not taking all of the services it needs with it.
Right, absolutely. I think as you set those up, you can build like services and put an API framework in place to be able to connect those services together. All different ways that you could facilitate that.
If you're going to hotel, you don't need to drag your own bed.
Exactly. So you can take advantage of services that are already established in the cloud, in that cloud that you're moving to.
All right, so when you are moving from, say, a cloud and a data center, and I think there are still agencies that are doing that, and you are going to the multi-cloud idea, how do you make sure you maintain some level of efficiency? And what are the steps to plan that kind of approach?
I think the first and foremost, you want to be able to look at an enterprise visibility or control component and having a service enabled that would allow you to do that. People always want to know what's going on in their environment. And when you get to a multi-cloud environment, you still have that need to be able to do that. And having some service in place to be able to make that set up is one of those ways that would allow you to do that. I think also with this, you'd want to have a FinOps component in place to be able to understand your cost and understand what different aspects of your environment are impacting the cost that you're going through, so that you can help plan that and realize that and actually acknowledge what's going on and be able to manage that accordingly as you move there. That's going to be key to your efficiency, because if you don't, you'll need to know the cost to know whether or not something's happening efficiently or not. I think as you're moving in place, having a solid identity account and management services in place would be something that's very important as well. And I think looking to do
what are the components of that?
Realizing that you've got different ways to recognize the account aspects and who's logged in, and who needs to access it, and what services need to access different parts are the different things that you'd be looking at there. I think looking for a federated authentication component would help you be able to manage that across the different cloud environments. I think this becomes really key as folks are looking towards a zero trust environment, and being able to have this kind of service in place to make it easier to move or get that access from the different cloud environments, and not be focused on one environment, but you could be able to get the access wherever you need it to be, is one of those things that you'd be able to pay attention to with that.
Right, so that kind of mitigates against that idea of relying too much on unique services of one particular cloud.
Absolutely, and getting those services in place would be gets you that flexibility that you're looking for, and that you're hoping for from the cloud environment.
And you mentioned finance operations,
Yes.
FinOps.
Yes.
The implication there is this is not just the IT staff,
Right.
or the CIO staff that should be involved in this whole multi-cloud planning.
Yes, all parts of your organization need to be engaged. It's not just going to impact your IT folks. And I think when we started talking about governance initially, as far as what we do from enterprise management, realizing the different types of folks that are going to be involved with this. The folks that are managing the money definitely need to know what's going on. The folks that are creating the contracts that an organization may be letting out need to realize all those different impacts that be associated with including these different environments. It's not necessarily going to be the same as they plan for the data center. There's different parties and engagements that are going to have to make this happen. You have to engage your developers, your IT staff, your management leadership staff on what they're doing. All levels of the organization need to be engaged to make this work.
All right, let's bring this back up then to the idea of the group you lead. You are the Digital Modernization Accelerator Director. What happens in there, and how does all of this multi-cloud actually support what the real goal is, which is to transform the services offered by a given agency?
So what we're doing from a digital modernization standpoint is to be able to do what we can to help the organizations be successful with their missions. And always that mission and the objectives and the priorities they're trying to achieve with any modernization effort is always going to be forefront with us. And so we're always looking at things that, building out different capabilities that would make our customers successful. We're going to be looking at different challenges that are out there and finding different solutions to be able to help them make that happen. Whether that's research and development activities on our end to find new ways to be able to utilize these capabilities to get more power to our customers and enabling their mission, or whether it be finding ways to make things more efficient for them. This would be, architecting your system this way will bring your costs down significantly. Finding ways to help them do that are things that we're doing that were very key to us of what we want to do with our digital modernization activities.
And we're living in this JADC2 era. That's one of the big projects you mentioned.
Right.
And that, from what I've read about it, it's really a concept. It's not a thing.
Right.
And it's the thing of it takes place within the individual armed services.
Right.
And so somehow there's this dream that those will all be interoperable at some point, and you will have a JADC2. So my question is, what should they be doing besides worrying about, this is not to trivialize that, their own functionality needs? life cycle management, troop support, whatever it is they're putting into these systems, combat controls, C2 systems, and the rest of it. What should they keep in mind, and how should they plan to make sure that when it does come together, the JADC2 will exist in a way that people are happy with?
I think, looking at the missions they're trying to execute with the different implementations is going to be important. I mean, they understand their mission, but how they want to be able to utilize the IT systems to be able to make that happen. They've got different implementations that they've got in place. They've got different sensor platforms and different vehicles they want to be able to control, but they also have to tie into logistics aspects as well. So keeping in mind how that architecture really would work together and making sure their system is going to accommodate those activities. Realizing what kind of data they're going to have and how it's going to move, realizing who they're going to be sharing that data with. And I don't think they want to be planning in the silo by themselves either. The idea of being able to interconnect and operate means they've got to be able to talk amongst each other, the services. And within the service themselves, they may have individual silos, so they'll have to get rid of those as well, so that they're talking both with across the service, but then also with in between the services as well.
It strikes me that there must be a bunch of micro containerized managed Kubernetes services that they could all share and get that done first, and then kind of program to that group.
Absolutely. Getting some commonality in place and realizing what those shared services would be and be able to facilitate that as a common platform or a common framework for them to use would be very tremendous.
All right. And what else do people need to think about then in this multi-cloud era? I was going to ask one particular thing is these organizations that are working towards the armed services and many civilian agencies still have collectively hundreds of millions of lines of COBOL running at this moment in the government. And speaking in terms of digital modernization, how do you bring that little cluster of code into this whole era? So, I mean, there's been a million tries at it.
Part of the challenge is the systems are still working, and they're very reliant on them, but they still function. They still need to do what those organizations need them to do. So there's not a big desire to get that big move yet, even because it's still working. There's a lot of risk in place to be able to make that happen. So giving these organizations a chance to see that these environments, they still can work when you move to the cloud. And I think it's just a matter of taking the time to plan out and architect it. They're not going to want to just probably lift and shift that thing into something else. They're going to want to look at how to redesign it to take advantage of these cloud services so that they can be more efficiently operated, so that they'll run faster. And realize that they can have a lot of scale that could be involved in this. And it would all be there available to them to be successful. And so having those conversations to be able to realize that with them is going to be important. I think we've been looking at different techniques. At one point there was this series of products that could automatically convert your COBOL code to Java or something else, and it created something that was unreadable and unusable for a lot of developers. So that wasn't going to be the answer.
Yeah, you'd take 10,000 lines of COBOL and it would come out to 1 million lines of Java.
So it just nobody could understand it. The COBOL code person couldn't do it, and the Java person couldn't make any sense of it. So there's different solutions too that have come out to be able to take some of that COBOL code or some of the data sets and be able to move them into containers, and then have them be able to be controlled within a cloud environment and make that work. But all they've done then is just shifted the code, and
it's a new bottle for the old wine.
Yes, and so you still have to maintain the folks who understand that code around, and that's one of the challenges is not having those folks around. So getting in to realize that, understanding how the systems work, understanding what the interfaces are with the COBOL code, what data sets they're talking to, what the batch processes are on those mainframes, and what they connect with. Break them out and look at moving them from pieces into different architectural sets within the cloud environments that you have. I think it's something that's very doable today, and it's something that working through piece by piece, take a data set and move it, take a couple of batch processes and move it, get the confidence that it's still working, will help these organizations move ahead and be able to avoid the sort of toe down on their enterprise that they've got with having those mainframes in place still.
Sure, so step by step sounds like the watchword for everything we're doing here as we modernize in the cloud.
Absolutely.
All right, thanks for being with us. My guest has been Jason Rapalski. He's the Vice President and Director of the Digital Modernization Accelerator at Leidos. I'm Tom Temin. You're listening to Federal News Network. Let's go back to the studio now for more on the DoD Cloud Exchange.